And this was just a quick character pose where I took some reference, which was a character just kind of thinking and smiling, and I I went through the stages of posing. So the first stage here, this first frame here, is what I tend to see a lot with beginning animators, where they will take the elements of the pose, certain elements. So, for example, the arm is up, the feet are slightly apart, the other hand is kind of up at the elbow, and that's it. Now, ignore the face for now, just the whole body. You'll notice that the hips have no rotation to them. The shoulders and hips, there's no contrapposto between them. There really isn't a line of action. None of the body parts feel connected to each other. It just feels meh. It's really bad, honestly. It's not even meh, it's bad. But I see this a lot because it's the idea that as long as you move things in their general position, well, it's posed. No. This would be kind of like a if you're thinking of drawing terms, this would be the stick figure version of the pose. Whereas, like, okay, yeah, it's got the elements, it's got arms and legs, but it's not much more than that. Instead, we want to push those different elements. He does kind of look like one of those animatronics. So we push the line of action. You can see suddenly there's a little bit of a line of action to that body. There's that curve going through. The hips and chest have contrapposto. We can see the angle of the shoulders versus the angle of the hips are slightly offset now, just a little bit. There's twist. If you look at the body here, the chest is pointing out right towards the camera, whereas the hips are pointing out screen right. There's a twist in his body. The feet have been repositioned to think of more of a graphical shape. So here, they kind of have that, but you can see how it's just kind of this very basic rectangle shape that the legs are doing. Whereas here, we're starting to get more of a parallelogram. It's starting to widen out the base compared to the hips just a little bit more. Alternatively, I could have done it to be more of a triangle, where his feet come in a little bit more like so. And now you get this triangular shape for the legs. But I'm trying to just kind of visualize that basic form. We're applying the straights versus curves even just a little bit. So this side of the character is simpler in design than this side. We get the arm, the hand, there's a little bit of a pinch in the waist there. We're starting to apply all of those different elements. We've got the silhouette. So if I turn off my lights here, and let's turn off the ground as well, like so, we can see that the silhouette is a little bit more interesting than that. Just a little bit. So we're starting to get all of these things. The balance is, so if we go through the list here, the list, let me bring it back here. Oop. Bring it down. So line of action, we improved it. Silhouette, we improved it. Straight versus curve, yes. Weight and balance, yes. Asymmetry, well, by default, he was also always pretty asymmetrical, but you can see here how the legs kind of feel like they're twinning. Both feet are pointing the same direction. They're at the same angle. That's symmetry right there. So asymmetrical. Feet are pointed in slightly different directions. It's just a little bit more visually interesting. And thanks for the reminder. So let's see. What else do we have? Simplified shapes. Like I said, I focused on the legs kind of having a little bit more of a taper. Contrapposto and twist. Yes, got that in there. Avoiding tangents. Well, in this version, I haven't completely avoided the tangents. If you look here, I've got a tangent right there between his shirt and his knuckle. They line up. From this close, you don't notice it, but from this far away, it's definitely feels like it just lines right up to each other. I'm getting tangents a little bit throughout those hands there. So, ooh, I have to push that. Okay, what else? Visual anchors. The shirt, I'm making sure that it feels round. That was a pretty poor sip. Yeah, I ran out of water. That was all the water I had. I'm gonna have to get water bottle number 2. Let's take a proper sip this time. Of course, the one time I go for a sip and it just sucks dry. So visual anchors, like I said, that's the construction lines, the lines of the clothing or of the character that can be used to sell depth. Well, for the most part, it's pretty good. Like I said earlier, when you're posing out a character in 3D space, you're usually going to get these by default. It's not like you have to try that hard. So we get that line of the shirt right there. We can see it a little bit, that visual depth. The line of his shirt right here. His sleeve there, the pant legs. Yeah, we got that. As long as I double check that I'm not getting any flattening on them. Exaggeration. This was the first pass of the pose, so I haven't applied my exaggeration yet. Again, the way I like to do exaggeration is I'll put the pose in place, and once I have it in place, I'll try to make it more. I'll try to make it better. And then gesture and character, well, that really depends on what you're working on. In this case, there is a character to this, but there's no specific character. So I don't have to worry about it too much. It's just one pose, one random pose. Okay, so this was version number 1 of the pose. Let's actually go through and see how it improved. So technically version 2 if you count this as a version, which I really don't. So we go further. Look at that. Exaggeration. It's the same pose, the same idea, but bigger. That line of action is stronger. That visual shape, that visual form of those legs suddenly becomes even bigger, less parallel. We're making it more dynamic. With that said, as we pushed it, oh, look at that. We removed some tangents, so we got a tangent right here between his hand and his sleeve. We got rid of that by overlapping the shapes, which makes it feel like there's more depth. But now we've got a tangent between his finger and his chin. Not great. We're also, as much as we're using the straights versus curves throughout all of this, we are not applying it to the forms of the body. So this is where in the examples we showed it as kind of as the arms as well as the whole body. In this case, I have it on the whole body. So you've got this simpler form on the right side, more complex on the left. But if we look at the individual forms, so for example, let's take his leg here. See how there's kind of the lump of the calf right here, and then on this side, right here, we've got the lump there and the lump there. It still kind of works, but it's not as clean as it could be. So we can push them just a little bit more. So we get this. Now, this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but suddenly we got rid of the tangent between his chin and his hand. But look at the legs now. It's very slight. But see how one side is straighter, and now the other side has this visual shape to it. From there, which was straight and then curve, curve, curve. Now we just get simple, straight curves on one side. This one here, same thing. Honestly, I could probably push it just a little bit more to straighten that edge right there. Just a little bit. Also get rid of that bow-leggedness. But it's a small change, but it adds more depth to the character. It makes it just more, I guess you could say, artistic in a way. Even his arm. We go from, see, right here, where you can feel that kind of lumpiness to the arm, to here where it's just a nice clean line versus a straight. A simple curve versus a straight on both sides. So it's taking that and just exaggerating just a little bit. Taking all those elements that we already applied and making them more. That's really posing. Now, like I said, this also takes into account anatomy and sympathetic action and all of those kind of elements. But in terms of the actual posing checklist, we've applied everything. Now, am I saying that this is the best pose ever? No. This was a quick pose that we did on stream once. But we applied those elements. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, let me actually just open up another scene here. I should have probably opened this up before the stream, but I just want to see if I did this correctly here. So I do want to take some of my own work and we'll see if I applied those elements in there. So I'm looking for this one. I think it's character tests or pose tests. Forget. We'll see. Now let me catch up with the chat here. Is it only me who's bothered by him touching the ground with only one toe? No, it is kind of weird. This was the reference as well. Was just one toe touching like this, which just kind of feels a little odd. Kind of looking back on the pose, I'd probably bring this back down just a little and then bring the foot kind of further in and then out this way. I'm still getting that offset in the feet, but without getting that weird contact. So a little bit more like that. Okay. So I think this is the right file. If not, I'll have to open up the next one. So let's see. While this is opening, does anyone have any questions on any of that? No problem. Thanks for pointing it out. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can go into on that topic. I think that's the majority of it. Okay. So this was some pose tests that I was doing for some characters, basically to show how you can have two characters with the same emotion, but it doesn't have to be the same pose. And more specifically, to show how as you're just as you're posing out a character, try not to start from the default pose, because the default pose, as you can see here, is just boring and doesn't really tell you who this character is. So this is the last point on our list, character. This has no character. This is just the T pose. This is the rig. If you take your pose and just give them a character first, who is this character? What's their attitude? You can use this as the basis for your animations, and it just makes it much easier to animate, oddly enough. Now, just joining the stream, is the PowerPoint posted anywhere? It's not posted anywhere yet, but I'm going to post it on the Pratt Bros Discord, which you can find down below, and the Animation Mentor Discord for anyone who's an Animation Mentor. So we've got kind of our default pose here, and I actually did a few variations of that. And right here, you can see on the right side, this is really pushing the graphical shape, especially the feet, trying to avoid that rectangular, just parallel legs on both of these. Just trying to visualize it to be just a little bit more interesting. Even like this is a good example of a point where I got too, what would be the right word? Too symmetrical. So as I was posing this out, I noticed that the legs right here were parallel to each other, which makes for a boring pose. is just this. Technically, it's kind of a slightly offset square or rectangle, but it's still two parallel. To make this more interesting, instead of having those two lines parallel, you would want to offset it so it's maybe something more like that, or more inwards, more triangular. And as I was doing this, I did that. I made it wider at the base there. And suddenly that feels a little bit more interesting than that. It's a small change, but it makes a big difference. And that's thinking of the visual kind of simplicity of the pose. Bring that onto the other side here. So let's break this down. Let's stick with the character on the right side here. So grease pencil, and go to Gato. Thank you so much for the subscription. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Oh man, 3 months already. Jeez, thank you so much. That's awesome. Thank you. So get my mind back on track here. Okay, so let's take a look at the pose on the screen right side here, right here. So what do we have? Well, if we go through the checklist, first up, line of action. Does the line of action read? Well, the line of action is going through the character and then through here. So yes, that's pretty good. You could even say that there's a secondary line going through there, which is not bad. So yay. First off on our list, check. Perfect. Okay, next up, silhouette. So if you're in Maya, the easiest way to check silhouette is make sure you don't have a ground plane in place and hit 7 on the keyboard. This will turn the lights on in the scene and you'll see your silhouette. So, is the silhouette working? For the most part, not bad. We can see the shape of the chair, we can see the character sitting on it, the head is clear, the angle of where they're looking is pretty clear, but I'm already noticing something. This and this is creating this square shape right here. Not only that, but my negative space, which is also part of the silhouette, has this weird little like blip right there, which feels a little odd. It's making it overly complex for no reason. Okay. That could be improved. So, how can I fix that? Well, let's just go to our character here. And for one, I need to offset the arms a little bit more, just to create this maybe a little bit more of an offset in that square shape of the shoulders. Now this would depend on the character. If the character is more confident, you're going to have a wider base. If they're more nervous, their elbows are going to come into their body a little bit more. So if I want her to feel more nervous, I could push her to be a little bit more like so. Now, of course, I have to fix the elbows now. So something like that. And something like this. So, what does that give me? Let's look at our silhouette. Much cleaner. Not only do we not have those little weird negative space elements anymore, but we've simplified it into this nice shape. And now we've got kind of this form right here. It's kind of this hourglass shape, this tapered hourglass. There we go. More interesting already, just by going through that little extra checklist there. Okay. What else? Next up on our list, straights versus curves. Well, if we kind of clean up the pose here, and let me actually tweak that hand because his fingers are a little strange. If we look at the overall shape of the pose, we have a simpler form back here. Let me actually draw it out. So if we kind of simplify this form here, like this, compared to the other form on the other side, let's see, let me clean that up a little bit more. Make sure my lines are actually correct. Okay, So let's turn off polygons. There we go. Simple versus complex. Straights versus curves. The typical term for this is straights versus curves. I personally like simple versus complex because straights can be a little bendy. So they are technically a little curved. But we have that. We can see that visual difference right in there. Now, it doesn't mean that it's, again, absolutely straight on one side, but we're favoring the complexity on one side more than the other. Okay, what else? Weight and balance. Well, this is pretty easy on this one. She's balanced on her hips, which are sitting down. So her balance point, the way you look at the balance point is just take the pit of the neck and draw a straight line down. And yep, she's balanced over her feet and over her hips there. So when a character is sitting, it's much easier to not have to worry about that too much. Okay, so pretty simple in this case. What else do we have? Asymmetry. Yeah, definitely asymmetrical. Nothing is twinning in any way. Simplified shapes, we already covered that. Contrapposto and twist. Okay, so she's sitting. Contrapposto is going to be a little trickier here because you don't really have that much room to move. But if we look at this, it's very slight, but there is a little bit of tilt in that chest there. I could probably increase it a little bit more. There's also just a little bit of twist. Just a little bit. If I wanted to push this more, I would probably tilt her a little bit more this way. And then if she's twisting and she has her elbow locked there, probably, let's go this way. So just a little bit of extra twist in there. Let's take that clavicle and move it down. Take this arm. I'll need that clavicle moved up. Right there. So just a little bit like that. It's not a big change. But now we get a little bit more contrapposto and then get that extra twist in there. Does it make a huge difference? No, but now it's in there and just makes it a little bit more dynamic. Okay, visual anchors. Well, as long as we avoid any flatness, so for example, the shirt, great, we feel the shape of the shirt. Right here, we get a curve. Well, here, look at that. This is a little flat right there. If I can, without ruining my pose, it would be nice to push that forward just a little bit. So something like that. Now we see that shape of the arm. Look at that. See how now we feel that contrast between the two arms? How one is kind of leaned back, whereas the other one's going forward? It's just a little change, but we feel that now because of that visual anchor or construction lines. If you look down here, you can definitely feel the construction line or the visual anchors of the pant legs right there. Okay, exaggeration. Well, I would just go through and do another pass on this. So for example, is the neck forward enough? Do I feel like maybe if I lowered this here a little bit more, is that going to make the character feel a little bit more focused? Or maybe I want to bring that up a little bit more, make her kind of feel more alert. Can I push the shoulders a little bit more? Can I lean the whole character forward a little bit more maybe? Something like that. Really exaggerate that line of action. That is going to make the pose stronger. And what I would do is I would have an older version and a new version and then try both of them so I can compare. Even the feet. So for example, the feet, there's a little offset to them. What if I try to push that a little bit more? So maybe bring this foot further back like this. Now we really feel that offset in those 2 feet. So something like that. It's not a huge change, but I'm exaggerating it a little bit. And then lastly, gesture and character. Is this pose working with this character? And in my case, yes, because that was the whole point of these poses here, was to show the character compared to, for example, this other character over here. And where's my camera moved? This is what happens when you don't lock your camera. Lock. Okay, so now we can see that, yes, our character is very different. Both of these characters don't feel the same in any of their poses. So going through that checklist, let's see, would you worry about these types of things when animating, or do you think it's more of a posing thing? Posing is the fundamental of all animation. If you don't have good posing, your animation's gonna suffer. So this is something I go through for every single pose. And when I say every single pose, it's like every single frame. Now, to be fair, the quick in-betweens, you don't have to be as meticulous. But one of the things that I was taught, and I try to apply as much as I can to my own shots, is that regardless of your animation, and let me actually find an animated clip here. Regardless of your animation, you should be able to scrub through it and just stop randomly and have an appealing pose. It's not just your main key poses, it's not just your, like, the fun poses. But let's go here, for example. So this is Moana. So if I just scrub through, boop, that should be an interesting pose. And we can see there's a little offset. It's a little symmetrical, but it's still visually interesting. The silhouette is clear. There's a line of action going through. Let's go through here. Well, that's interesting. Go through here. That's an interesting pose. There. Very interesting. They're not going to be as dynamic and perfect as the key poses. So for example, like this would probably be a key pose right around there. But it's still dynamic. We're not just letting Maya or whatever program we're using take the in-betweens and turn them into mush. It's still going to be more dynamic as long as your key poses are intact, but you really want to go through and think of every pose. So for example, as she's kicking through here, the silhouette is always clear. There's no point where the silhouette is just a mess or where the line of action is non-existent. It's always there. IK or stretching IK? If you mean trying to avoid the IK stretching, no, that's fine depending on the shot. If you're trying to go for more cartoony, you can definitely stretch it. If it's more realistic, you would want to avoid that as much as possible. It really depends on the style of the shot. Now, can you give a quick explanation of visual anchors? Yes. So let me open up the presentation again. So visual anchors is right here. So visual anchors is basically anything that can be used to show the depth of an object. So for example, the line of the sleeve, the line of a collar, a shadow falling on a character. This is more of a 2D thing, but in CG we still want to think about it so that we can make things feel like there's more depth. It makes it more dynamic the more we push that visual anchor, or if we want to flatten a pose, take away that visual anchor. Let's see, how did you capture Moana? I tried capturing some scene with OBS on Disney Plus. I just bought the Blu-ray. So most of the time when I capture stuff, it's just taking the Blu-ray and putting it onto my computer. And for that, I use a program called Handbrake. Handbrake, it's totally free. And it's really good. So, yes, and I should take a sip. My other water bottle is empty, so I'm going to have to use the big metal one now. So hopefully that answers your question there. Yeah, and again, it when you're posing things out, it really is every frame, whether it's 2D or 3D. So, for example, let's take another look at a different scene. So this is Wreck-It Ralph. So if we look at this, and I'm just gonna jump through, interesting pose, jump through, interesting pose, jump through, interesting pose. I'm never getting a point where I look at a pose and it's just flat and dead and there's no line of action, there's no like anything. It's just everything is visually interesting. And honestly, if you can block in your animation with really powerful poses, your in-betweens and your breakdowns will be powerful too, because you're building it off of strong posing. If you block out your shot and your posing is meh, is okay, and then you start animating it, and then you go back and go, okay, now I'm gonna make my poses stronger, my key poses. You've already built your in-betweens and breakdowns with the weak poses, which means that you're either going to have to reanimate all of those anyway, or you're going to get that disconnect where you have strong poses, strong keys, but weak in-betweens, weak breakdowns. They're just meh. So as long as you're really focusing on your posing early on, it doesn't mean it has to be perfect, not that first pass. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. But as long as you're thinking through it all, you're going to get stronger in-betweens after. So yeah, all good posing. Now, to be fair, these characters are sitting very still. Let's go with something a little bit more... Let's see, do I have one? Okay. This is Maui doing the haka. Something with a little bit more movement. If I jump through here, good posing. And then just the still pose. Like, even this, still good silhouette. Everything's readable. Everything's legible. All good. Even here, look at that nice straight line of action as he's jumping upwards here. So, yes, posing goes through your entire animation.